Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskritya Naram Jaya Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiriye Nashtaprayeshu Vadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. So continuing with the discussion on Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsvarup Das Goswami, Volume 2, Planting the Seed, New York City, 1965 to 1966, Chapter 18, Breaking Ground. So Prabhupada is in his storefront at 26 Second Avenue, and he got the apartment also, started classes, going further. He had a broad mission, broader even than translating Srimad Bhagavatam. And so he gave much of his time and energy to meeting visitors. Had his only aim been to write, then there would have been no need to have taken the risk and trouble of coming to America. Now many people were coming, and an important part of his mission was to talk to them and convince them of Krishna consciousness. His visitors were usually young men who had recently come to live on the Lower East Side. He had no secretary to screen his visitors, nor did he have scheduled visiting hours. Whenever anyone happened by at any time, from early morning to 10 at night, Prabhupada would stop his typing or translating and speak with them. It was an open neighborhood, and many visitors would come by right off the street. Some were serious, but many were not. Some even came intoxicated. Often they came not to inquire submissively, but to challenge. Once a young hippie on an LSD trip found his way upstairs and sat opposite the Swami. "Right now, I am higher than you are," he announced. "I'm God." Prabhupada bowed his head slightly, his palms folded. "Please accept my obeisances," he said. Then he asked God to please leave. Others admitted frankly that they were crazy or haunted by ghosts and sought relief from their mental suffering. Lon Solomon. I was looking for spiritual centers, places where one can go, not like stores where they ask you to leave, but where you can actually talk to people and try to understand the ultimate truth. I would come to the Swamis knowing it was definitely a spiritual center. There was definitely something there. I was on drugs and disturbed with the notion that I must be God or some very important personality way out of proportion to my actual situation. I was actually in trouble, mentally deranged because of so much suffering, and I would kind of blow in to see him whenever I felt the whim to do so. I didn't make a point of going to his meetings, but a lot of times I would just come. One time I came and spent the night there. I was always welcome at any time to sleep in the storefront. I wanted to show the Swami what a sad case I was, so he should definitely do something for me. He told me to join him and he could solve my problems, but I wasn't ready. I was really into sex and I wanted to know what he meant by illicit sex. What was his definition? He said to me, "This means sex outside of marriage," but I wasn't satisfied with the answer. And I asked him for more details. He told me to first consider the answer he had given me and then come back the next day and he would tell me more. Then I showed up with a girl. The Swami came to the door and said, "I'm very busy. I have my work. I have my translating. I cannot talk with you now." Well, that was the only time he didn't offer me full hospitality and full attention and talk with me as many questions as I had. So I left immediately with the girl. He was correct in his perception that I was simply going to see him just to try to impress the girl. He saw through it right away, and he rejected that type of association. But every time I came, I was in trouble, and he always helped me. Sometimes young men would come with scholarly pretensions to test the Swami's knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. "You have read the Gita," Prabhupada would say. "So what is your conclusion?" If you claim to know Gita, then you should know the conclusion that Krishna is present. But most people didn't think that there was supposed to be a definite conclusion to the Gita. And even if there was such a conclusion, that didn't mean they were supposed to arrange their life around it. The Gita was a spiritual book, and you didn't have to follow it. Yeah, that is most of the people, not just America, in India also. They think Gita is a spiritual book, nice book, but don't follow it. One young man approached the Swami asking, "What book will you lecture from next week? Will you be teaching the Tibetan Book of the Dead, as a Prabhupada would teach spiritually like a college survey course in world religions?" "Everything is there in Bhagavad Gita," Prabhupada replied. "We could study one verse for 3 months." And there were other questions. "What about Camus? What's his philosophy?" Prabhupada asked. He says everything is absurd, and the only philosophical question is whether to commit suicide. Well, that means everything is absurd for him. The material world is not absurd, but there is spiritual world beyond this one. That means he doesn't know the soul. Soul cannot be killed. Adherents of various thinkers approached him. "What about Nietzsche, Kafka, Timothy Leary, Bob Dylan?" Prabhupada would ask what the philosophy was, and the particular follower would have to explain and defend his favorite intellectual hero. "They are all mental speculators," Prabhupada would say. "Here in this material world, we are all conditioned souls. Your knowledge is imperfect, your senses are blunt. What good is your opinion? We have to hear from the perfect authority, Krishna." "Do you mean to say that none of the great thinkers are God conscious?" a boy asked. "Their sincerity is their God consciousness. But if we want perfect knowledge of God, then we have to consult Shastra." Often there were challenges, but under the Swami's austere and hard logic, the challenger would usually trail off into thoughtful silence. "Is the spiritual knowledge of China advanced?" somebody asked. Prabhupada would sometimes answer simply by making a sour face. "Well, I'm a follower of Vedanta myself." "Well, do you know what Vedanta means? What's the first aphorism of Vedanta? Do you know?" "No." "Then how can you speak of Vedanta? Vedasya sarvairahame vedya." Krishna says that he is a goal of Vedanta. So if you are a Vedantist, then you must become Krishna conscious. "What about Buddha? Do you follow him?" "No." "No, you just talk. Why don't you follow? Follow Krishna, follow Christ, follow Buddha, but don't just talk." This sounds the same as Christianity. How is it any different? It's the same, love of God. But who's a Christian who follows? The Bible teaches, "Thou shalt not kill." But all over the world, Christians are expert in killing. Do you know that? I believe the Christians say that Jesus Christ died for our sins. So why are you still sinning? Although Prabhupada was a stranger to America, they were strangers to absolute knowledge. Whenever anyone would come to see him, he wouldn't waste time. He talked philosophy, reason, and argument. He constantly argued against atheism and impersonalism. He spoke strongly to prove the existence of God and the universality of Krishna consciousness. He talked often and vigorously, day and night, meeting all kinds of questions and philosophies. He would listen also, and he heard a wide range of local testimonies. He heard the dissatisfaction of young Americans with the war and with American society. One boy told him he didn't want to get married because he couldn't find a chaste girl. It was better to go with prostitutes. Another confided that his mother had planned to abort him, but at the last moment, his grandmother had convinced her not to. He heard from homosexuals. Someone told him that a set of New Yorkers considered it chic to eat the flesh of aborted babies. And in every case, he told them the truth. He talked with Marxists and explained that although Marx says that everything is a property of the state, the fact that everything is a property of God, only spiritual communism, which puts God in the center, can actually be successful. He discounted LSD visions as hallucinations and explained how God can be seen factually and what God looks like. Although these one-time visitors came and went away, a few new friends began to stay on, watching the Swami deal with different guests. They began to appreciate the Swami's arguments, his concern for people, and his devotion to Krishna. He seemed actually to know how to help people, and he invariably offered them Krishna consciousness as much as they could take as a solution to their problems. A few began to take the Swami's message to the heart. So some people started to change. Now was a time when they registered the society. We shall call our society ISKCON. Prabhupada had laughed playfully when he first coined the acronym. He had initiated the legal work of incorporation that spring while still living on the Bowery. But even before its legal beginning, he had been talking about his International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And so it had appeared in letters to India and in the Village Voice. It's a Village Voice is a local newspaper. A friend had suggested a title that would sound more familiar to Westerners, International Society for God Consciousness. But Prabhupada had insisted Krishna consciousness. God was a vague term, whereas Krishna was exact and scientific. God consciousness was spiritually weaker, less personal, and if Westerners didn't know what Krishna was, didn't know that Krishna was God, then the International Society for Krishna Consciousness would tell them by spreading his glories in every town and village. Krishna consciousness was Prabhupada's own rendering of a phrase from Srila Rupa Goswami's Padyavali, written in the 16th century. Krishna Bhakti Ras Bhavita, to be absorbed in the mellow taste of executing devotional service to Krishna. But to register ISKCON legally as a non-profit, tax-exempt religion required money and a lawyer. Carl Jurgens had already gained some experience in forming religious, political, and social welfare groups. And when he had met Prabhupada on the Bowery, he had agreed to help. He had contacted his lawyer, Stephen Goldsmith. Stephen Goldsmith, a young Jewish lawyer with a wife and 2 children and an office on Park Avenue, was interested in spiritual movements. When Carl told him about Prabhupada's plans, he was immediately fascinated by the idea of setting up a religious corporation for an Indian Swami. He visited Prabhupada at 26 Second Avenue, and they discussed incorporation, tax exemption, Prabhupada's immigration status, and Krishna consciousness. Mr. Goldsmith visited Prabhupada several times. Once he brought his children, who liked the soup the Swami cooked. He began attending the evening lectures, where he was often the only non-hippie member of the congregation. One evening, having completed all the legal groundwork and being ready to complete the procedures for incorporation, Mr. Goldsmith came to Prabhupada's lecture in Kirtan to get signatures from the trustees for the new society. I mean, can we believe it? Prabhupada is starting a society, and he called it International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He didn't even himself have any place, any office. This 26 Second Avenue, a small storefront which he had rented. Nobody even knew about Prabhupada. And I mean, how many people in New York, in the whole New York, knew about him? And here he is starting International Society. And we'll see people to get signatures from the trustees. Who are going to be his trustees? Hippies, some hippies who didn't know anything about Krishna consciousness. But they signed, and this is how Prabhupada started. This is nothing less than a miracle, actually. July 11th, Prabhupada is lecturing. Mr. Goldsmith, wearing slacks and a shirt and tie, sits on the floor near the door, listening earnestly to the lecture, despite the distracting noises from the neighborhood. Prabhupada has been explaining how scholars mislead innocent people with non-devotional interpretations of the Bhagavad Gita, and now in recognition of the attorney's respectable presence And as if to catch Mr. Goldsmith's attention better, he introduces him into the subject of the talk. I'll give you a practical example of how things are misinterpreted. Just like our president, Mr. Goldsmith, he called him Mr. President. He knows that expert lawyers, by interpretation, can do so many things. When I was in Calcutta, there was a rent tax passed by the government, and some expert lawyer changed the whole thing by his interpretation. The government had to reenact a whole law because the purpose was foiled by the interpretation of this lawyer. So we are not out of foiling the purpose of Krishna, for which the Bhagavad Gita was spoken. But unauthorized persons are trying to foil the purpose of Krishna. Therefore, that is unauthorized. All right, Mr. Goldsmith, you can ask anything. Mr. Goldsmith stands, and to the surprise of the people gathered, he makes a short announcement asking for signers on an incorporation document for the Swami's new religious movement. Prabhupada. They're present here. You can take the addresses now, Mr. Goldsmith. I can take them now? Yes, Prabhupada. Yes, you can. Bill, you can give your address, and Raphael, you can give yours, and Don, Roy, and Mr. Green. As a meeting breaks up, those called on to sign as trustees come forward, standing around in the little storefront, waiting to leaf cursorily through the pages the lawyer has produced from his thin attaché, and to sign as he directs. Yet not a soul among them is committed to Krishna consciousness. It's nothing less than a miracle, actually. Mr. Goldsmith meets his quota of signers, a handful of sympathizers with enough reverence towards the Swami to want to help him. The first trustees, who will hold office for a year until the first annual meeting of the corporation, are Michael Grant, who puts down his name and address without ever reading the document, Mike's girlfriend, Jan, and James Green. No one seriously intends to undertake any formal duties as trustees of the religious society, but they are happy to help the Swami by signing his fledgling society into legal existence. According to law, a second group of trustees will assume office for the second year. They are Paul Gardiner, Roy, and Don. The trustees for the third year, Carl Jurgens, Bill Epstein, and Raphael. None of them know exactly what the half a dozen legal-sized type pages mean, except that Swamiji is forming a society. That's all they know. Why? For tax exemption, in case someone gives a big donation, and for other benefits an official religious society might receive. But these purposes hardly seem urgent or even relevant to the present situation. Who is going to make donations except maybe for Mr. Goldsmith, who has any money, because he's a lawyer? But Prabhupada is planning for the future, and he's planning for much more than just tax exemptions. He's trying to serve his spiritual predecessors and fulfill the spiritual prediction of a spiritual movement that is to flourish for 10,000 years in the midst of the age of Kali. Within the vast Kali age, a period which is to last 432,000 years, the 60s are but an insignificant moment. The Vedas describe that the time of the universe revolves around it through a cycle of 4 seasons or yugas, and Kali Yuga is the worst of times, in which all spiritual qualities of men diminish until humanity is finally reduced to a bestial civilization, devoid of human decency. However, the Vedic literature foretells a golden age of spiritual life, beginning after the advent of Lord Chaitanya, lasting for 10,000 years, an eddy that runs against the current of Kali Yuga, with a vision that soars off to the end of the millennium and beyond. Yet with his 2 feet solidly on the ground of Second Avenue, Prabhupada has begun an international society for Krishna consciousness. He has many practical responsibilities: paying the rent, incorporating his society, and paving the way for a thriving worldwide congregation of devotees. Yet he doesn't see his humble beginning as limiting the greater scope of his divine mission. He knows that everything depends on Krishna, so whether he succeeds or fails is up to the Supreme. He only has to try. The purposes stated within ISKCON's Articles of Incorporation reveal Prabhupada's thinking. There were 7 points. Similar to those given in the prospectus for the League of Devotees he formed in Jhansi, India in 1953. That attempt had been unsuccessful, yet his purposes remain unchanged. So there are 7 purposes of ISKCON, and actually I have to admit, I haven't memorized it. I should, and all of us should also, because this is our basis. And I think we'll discuss this tomorrow. We should memorize it. I should do it too. Okay, I guess we can stop here. See, anybody has any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisance. So, Prabhuji, you're saying we should memorize these dates when things happen.
Not the dates, but 7 purposes. We'll discuss it tomorrow.
Okay.
7 purposes of ISKCON.
7 purposes. Okay, yes.
Dates, if you can, great, but if you cannot, that's fine.
Yeah, purposes are very important. Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you very much, Prabhuji.
Okay, thank you, Mata. Thank you all. You have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.